I think the Pikmin game actually came out maybe for the GameCube, which my family didn't have. And when it came out for the Wii, maybe it was already during the time that I wasn't really playing that many games anymore. So, because there was a time when I stopped playing games, it was about, I think, 10-year break from playing any video games. Although I was aware that there were people who were playing games, especially the younger ones, the students that came to my class. Some of them were really interested in knowing about the video game industry, what I knew about it. Some of them played games that I didn't play. Some of them were talking about games that I knew somewhat, but I've never played. Some of them maybe were thinking about joining a video game studio and building games and stuff like that, but I wasn't really too interested. I began to learn Japanese because I was very much interested in video games, but there was a point when I wasn't doing anything related to video games. And actually, it was more of storybooks. Storybooks that people could quickly create and share with other people. Because at the time, the app that we were building was actually for pediatric care, and it was supposed to help people find out what's the problem with a child, for instance, and what they could do about it. Maybe they could see if they can find some type of medicine to give the child, or if they can't really do that, they'd have to bring the child to the hospital immediately, things like that. Then I found that there were other people who were also doing something like that, like the students from the US, the University of Washington, and other places. They were already also working on these things, and they got a lot of people using the app that they were building because they were going to Africa, and there seemed to be a lot of people who could benefit from the app, and there seemed to be a lot of people also willing to use the app there. And I think that Africa was, or still is, a test bed for these things, especially if you have the funding to go there and do some tests, and the people are actually willing to be tested on and see if they'd use the app or something like that. So because of that, it seemed like what we were doing was already something that other people were doing, and they already had quite a lot of users, and people seem to be more active there. So I thought that what else can we do with this type of app where you have people entering the types of screens that they'd want, so that maybe, for instance, you need the name of the person, and the person can enter the name of the patient, and then what else can you do? Maybe the patient has some kind of illness, then the app also helps you out diagnose the illness based on what you're entering as inputs, like, for instance, the symptoms and whatever else that are gonna be important to diagnose the child. So from that idea, what else can we do? And it turned out that we could come up with a storybook, and based on the answers, for example, maybe I'd want to go to this place. According to the story, if you go to this place, this is what's waiting for you there. And from there, we get some kind of ending. And later on, you also might want to ask certain questions to the reader if he or she really understood what was going on in the story. So, something like that. So, we transformed a survey type of app to a storybook where you could ask questions to the reader, and in that way, it was a little bit more interactive than just passively reading stuff. Of course, I think that if it went pretty all right, pretty well, then we could move on to something more interactive, even more interactive. Really like a video game, I think. But at the time, I thought that if we were coming up with some kind of app that many people could use, it gotta be something really simple, not too complex, not too time consuming for people to use actually. And I did get a lot of users, mostly my students, because each class I handled, I asked them to use the app. So because of that, I did get quite a lot of people in the groups where we shared the apps and talked about certain bugs or errors that came up. But really, I think some time later, you'd wonder if you could make money out of the project, right? And turned out that it could make money, but very short term. So it would like spike up and then nothing anymore. and it's and it really did that because I was asking people I knew, friends, people who knew me also, if they'd want to try out the app, and we put the price to really low. So it's just like you have a loose cash, and if you're my friend, maybe you'd want to try it out and help us out. and and lo and behold, there were a lot of people actually who helped out. That's why it was interesting that I think maybe Google also was looking at it because the proceeds that I got were from various currencies. People from all sorts of places who knew me were helping out, and so the proceeds were in various currencies. And maybe some people were wondering also how come he's getting all these payments. And the payments weren't huge, they were little payments. Actually, what I discovered that was really interesting was that the payments directly went to my credit card. It wasn't like I had to wait to accumulate $100 before I could get the payments. So when people paid, it went into my credit card. And you know that in a credit card system, for instance, you could actually get a positive. So if what I mean by that is, in case you get more people giving you money, then the money that you get in your credit card is positive. It's not like you have debt, right? Because whenever you borrow money using your credit card, you incur a debt, right? But this one is in the other direction. And it turns out you can do that. You could actually get money directly getting into your credit card, and instead of debt, you get the opposite. So it was an interesting discovery for me. Only the payments I were getting were really small. But it was a lot better than the $100 that you have to wait to accumulate before you get the payment. Because there were platforms like the Apple App Store that did that. Actually, it's not only the Apple App Store, other platforms were doing that as well. Like Steam also requires $100 minimum per month. So if you're selling your games there for really cheap prices, like for instance, $1 per app, I highly doubt that you'll make money that way. I think it's really more of like getting people to know what you're doing and from there make money. And I think the path to making money is really to get contractual, subcontractual work. And I think that we also can learn about how Japanese studios, especially the new ones, the ones that started out of doing other work from a bigger studio, and then they decided to leave. They decided to come up with their own studio, and they began by getting subcontraction type of work. So some other studio, maybe they knew about the entrepreneur, the new developer that created his own studio, and he has gotten a name for himself through releasing well-known titles that people recognize. And so another studio contacts him and asks him to do something for them. And in that way, he would make money. Only it doesn't happen always that the new studio, would actually make money because sometimes, like in certain studios that former developers at Capcom experienced, they didn't have the manpower, the talent that the bigger studio had. So when they were working at Capcom, for example, at the time, they had access to human resources that weren't anymore available when they began their own studio. That's why some of the problems that they encountered were getting people to actually help them out. And what happened in Mr. Yoshiki Okamoto's case was that when he started Game Republic, he also began to hire people. Only the people he hired were from various studios, and each of these new hirees had their own way of doing things because all the other studios that were doing stuff in the video game industry had their own way of doing things. And so when these guys left those studios and came to Game Republic, they brought the way of doing things that they learned from their former studios to the new studio, and that's where Mr. Yoshiki Okamoto really experienced quite a big headache because each one would tell him that this is what we were doing at so and so company, and another one would tell him, no, this is what we were doing. And so he had to really figure out how exactly was he gonna put these guys together. And it turned out that as he learned, it would take about 5 years to really get people to work together, people from different studios, because they already were thinking in a different type of way. So a lot of the bigger studios prefer to get new hirees that were also newly graduated. That's why Capcom, for example, these days would be willing to give a lot of money to new hirees because they would train the person to think in a certain way. And if the person decides to leave, it would be a little bit difficult also for another studio to get him, given that he was already trained in a certain way. Although, of course, maybe if you can manage the company, the studio really well, you'd be able to make use of that person. So going back to the idea that you launch a game and it's really cheap, and it's not really because you want to make money out of the product, the game, but more of getting people to see what you're doing. And then from there, that's how you could get outsourcing, subcontractual type of work. And that's how you'd make money.